So I thought this might be a little fun project if you guys are interested in following me on this. So I got these seedlings from a friend of mine. Unfortunately, he couldn't kind of continue with the seedlings in terms of fruiting it out and waiting for it to waiting for it to mature and fruit. Uh, so I was gonna kind of just continue that project and see what happens to this. So this is a hybrid of two species, Annona cherimoya and Annona squamosa. So these seedlings came from the fruit of El Bumpo, which is a cherimoya, and the pollinating parent was a big red sugar apple. I have never tasted either one of them, whether it's the El Bumpo or the big red sugar apple. From my understanding, in terms of the big red sugar apple, the sugar apples originated in sugar apple, the sweet sop, it originated in the Americas, but in Asia, it's pretty popular in Asia, and most places kind of categorized into two categories. One is considered like a chewy sugar apple. That one, the flesh is much more firmer. You can't really break it apart with your hand, but you could kind of peel the skin off easily. It still has like segments around the flesh. It's just that kind of holds on together a bit tighter. The other category is sugar apple, so it's sweet sop. There's sometimes it's translated as grain sugar apple or grain sweet sop, and the difference in that is that has a lot of flesh around the seeds. You can kind of break it apart and it kind of splits into these like flesh, like that little flesh sac around the seeds kind of comes apart easily. You can kind of split it with your seed. It tends to be a bit more softer in texture, a bit more creamier if you let it kind of really ripen. So I've never had that version of a sugar apple. I've had in Asia. I had mostly the chewy sugar apple, but there are two categories that they kind of fall into, and then occasionally they come in red and or green. This variety, the big red sugar apple, falls under the red skin variety, and it falls under the more kind of creamier sugar apple category, where you kind of flesh kind of breaks apart into segments. The skin kind of holds on a little bit more to the flesh, but you get those little kind of segments that fall apart. So that's the big red sugar apple. And the fruit it came from on this is an El Bumpo Cherimoya. I've never had it, but from my understanding, it has really good flavor component. It's very sweet with a good sub-acid flavor to it. It's a very kind of bumpy looking fruit, like lots of protuberance on it. So it's pretty distinguishable. That variety originated here in California, the El Bumpo, and lots of people have it ranked pretty high in the list. Unfortunately, I never tasted one before, but in terms of flavor component, it's ranked pretty high. In terms of texture, it is more or less in the cherimoya category, or kind of like a creamy custardly flesh. Okay, so that's the two parents that make these seedlings up. So my expectations in terms of what the fruit will produce, if I'm lucky, it will probably produce a red skin atomoya that has more or less more of the flavor components of an El Bumpo. Unfortunately, I don't think it'll be that. I don't think it'll be a chewy kind of atomoya. Probably more or less kind of like, you let it really ripen, it'd be more or less like a creamy atomoya. And with the atomoyas, a lot of the old varieties, in my opinion, I'm just guessing because every time they they breed it for that. They really kind of never distinguish the difference between the two sugar apple kind of categories. But I'm guessing some of the old varieties like the African Pride, the Priestley, the Bradley, they were all crossed with a what I mentioned, not the chewy sugar apple, but more or less the grain or the soft, creamy flesh sugar apple. Just from what I've seen in terms of texture, there are a few exceptions. I feel like PPC, for example, was definitely crossed with a chewy sugar apple, and possibly even Gefner was crossed with more of a chewy sugar apple. But most of the other kind of old varieties out there, they were definitely crossed with a kind of the creamier sugar apple. And for sometimes what you found most of that in the US was that kind of variety versus the chewy one. Okay, so at best I think this project will lead to a kind of like a red skin Cherimoya, and hopefully it has more of a El Bumpo flavor component. Possibly the flesh will not be very chewy, probably lean more towards like a creamy texture. It might be a little bit chewy just because of the flesh that builds up around the sac, but not too much of it. And at worst, this will probably end up producing a green skin Cherimoya that has a flavor component that leans more towards a sugar apple, which is not very complex. Not a very complex flavor, just more kind of leaning towards sweetness, and that's about it. Not very, we don't get a lot of different tropical flavors to it. So that's at worst what it would produce. Fortunately, there is 2 seedlings here. The trunk size is about the same on these 2 seedlings. They're the same, but if you look at the leaves, it's very interesting. One is producing a much larger, almost Cherimoya-like leaf, and the other one is producing a more narrow leaf, kind of almost like some of the Cherimoyas we see. Kind of that intermediate form between the two. So what I'll be doing in spring is I'll be taking scions from this. I don't think I'll end up planting this in the ground. I'm not sure yet. Lots of my space on my project has been dedicated to mangoes, so I'm not sure if I'm going to be planting this in the ground, but I'll definitely be harvesting the scions from this and grafting it onto a mature Cherimoya rootstock. The intention of that is that it's a more mature rootstock, and hopefully it will bloom and fruit for me in between 2 and 3 years. I've done this in the past with Cherimoya seedlings, and it took at least 2 full seasons of growth before it initiated the flowering. So in California, that doesn't really save you much time. Like if you had space, you just plant this in the ground. They fruit like, maybe at earliest 5 years, at longest maybe 7 years. So they're not too hard. They don't take a long time to fruit. So it doesn't really save you much time unless you have, but it does save you space if you have a lot of seedlings and projects you want to do. So that's what I'm going to do with this. In spring, I'm going to be harvesting these scions from an immature tree that has not flowered. I'll be grafting it onto a mature Cherimoya rootstock and see what happens. So it should take, it's just a matter of how long will it be before it starts flowering for me and fruiting. So this is a little fun project. If you guys want to follow me on it, it'll probably take at least 2 years before we see any 2 years before we see any fruits on this. So just a little fun project. So if you want to follow me on it, it'd be awesome. So I'll begin the next step in probably spring when I harvest the scions. All right, thanks everyone.